Welcome to Flow 360. I am your host, Dheeraj Adhikari. As always, for this week, I have Sahil Bhargava, who is the Director of Growth as his position. I'm really happy to have him here because we've been talking about it for a long time. Welcome to Flow 360.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so as we get it started, I would like to ask you a question from tell me about your beginning. Let's talk about how your childhood was. Obviously, let's get back to family, but first, let's just start with your childhood. How was your life as a kid?
Yeah, so I was born in India, born and raised from New Delhi, the
Mm-hmm.
capital. So born in India, Delhi is where I grew up. That's where I went to school. That's also where I went to college,
Mm-hmm.
which we call school here in the United
Yeah,
States.
yeah.
But that's where I really grew up. And I think childhood was mostly exploring new things, but largely uneventful.
Okay.
I think so. I was in one school from for elementary school from K through 5. I was
Mm-hmm.
in school. Then I went to a different school, let's say
Okay.
a little more privileged and elite kind of
Private
school.
school.
I mean, in India, all schools are private.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't really go to public school. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't exist like what we have here. So
Mm-hmm.
I went to a different school where I discovered new things. So
Mm-hmm.
when I grew up playing a lot of sports.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to grew up in an apartment community,
Mm-hmm.
and every day at 5 p.m., 6 p.m., we would all just go to the courtyard and play something.
Mm-hmm.
Some days it would be cricket, some days it would be football, which is soccer here.
Yeah, yeah.
Some days it would be badminton, tennis, table tennis, ping pong. So
Yeah.
same thing. So grew up playing a lot of sports, had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
exposure to sports, but mostly for fun, not
Okay.
really for training. So that was a constant in my life.
Yeah.
Then growing up in India and at school, I was discovering new things.
Mm-hmm.
So this was in what 2008 and 10. I mean, around
Mm-hmm.
that time, 2012, I guess. So Model UN was a pretty new thing in school back
Mm-hmm.
then. And I tried my hand at that. I got to travel a bit around India, attending conferences. That was a great learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think I learned a lot there. And then being growing up in India, I think you're pretty academically focused for good
Yeah,
and bad both.
yeah.
So there was a lot of academic focus. I It's very common for people to grow up in India and decide to be an engineer at
Mm-hmm.
age
Or
18.
doctor.
Engineer or doctor, pretty
Mm-hmm.
standard, pretty common, unfortunately. So that's what I studied for in my
Mm-hmm.
high school. But for good or bad, I didn't make it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's supposed to be an entrance examination in India, as is the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two exams. One's a qualifying exam, and the other is the main exam that determines where you actually go.
Yeah.
I didn't pass the qualifying exam,
Okay.
and that kind of changed the trajectory of my life. And
Okay.
that was childhood,
Okay.
childhood slash growing up
Yeah, yeah.
until high school.
In terms of what you saw yourself as, obviously we talked about engineers, doctors. That's the field that people want to get into. As a kid,
Yeah.
what did you really wanted to get into? What was the field that you're like, you know what, I'm gonna really like plan or target to be in this field? What was your goal?
Very honestly, I was pretty clueless.
Really?
Genuinely clueless. Like I wanted to be. I did not want to be much, to be honest, and
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to be an engineer because that's what my parents wanted, and then
Mm-hmm.
that's what everybody wanted, and
I
that
guess
also
it's
seemed like a logical thing to do.
yeah, it's more of a cultural norm where
Cultural norm.
they say, okay, you're going to be an engineer or you're going to be a
Yeah,
doctor.
like pick something. Like there was no pressure in that sense, but pick
Mm-hmm.
something. But unfortunately, the options from which I was picking were quite limited.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know many people beyond it.
Yeah.
I had no exposure to life beyond it.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know what could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not have any vision of the future growing up, honestly. Like, and I've thought about that recently, but I didn't know. I was
Mm-hmm.
pretty clueless.
I feel like more than you, me, or somebody, there are a lot of people that have similar experience, but it's just we don't really talk about it, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody becomes a doctor, and we're like, oh my gosh, he became a doctor. Maybe we might want our kid to be a doctor, we're an engineer or something.
Yeah.
But like parents don't really ask kids, what do you want to be or what do you see yourself becoming?
Yeah. And I really think it's a bad question to ask.
Uh-huh.
I mean, why do you want to be stuck with the choice that a 16-year-old
Yeah.
self made?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad I'm not an engineer. I mean, 16-year-old me knew nothing. He had not lived abroad. He hadn't. There was many more things he had to learn and see. So
Yeah.
I think it's a blessing in disguise. Honestly, I mean,
Mhm.
you don't really know what you want to do
Yeah.
that early on. So yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of your family, were your family supportive of what you wanted to get into after college, or study what you wanted to study in college? Were they supportive of what you're
Yeah,
planning for?
I was pretty lucky in that sense that my parents are pretty supportive. I
Uh-huh.
mean, by and large, they've
Uh-huh.
not been super interfering. Let's just say I think Indian parents
Yeah.
tend to
Yeah.
be that. So I think I was pretty lucky. My parents are pretty chill. And as I said, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I decided at the time to go to a liberal arts college, which is absolutely not the norm in India. I mean, what is liberal arts? You don't
Yeah.
get a
Yeah.
job after liberal arts.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? Voodoo shit, right? So I wanted to go to a liberal arts college. It was a new college in India, which is not something
That was
people
not
from
like
India do.
the norm.
It was beyond the norm because the college itself was new, had no reputation.
Yeah.
And as you know, right, I mean, Asian society is much more invested in reputation and safety
Yeah.
and status
Yeah.
that way. So where I went had none of that. And what really drew me to the place I wanted to go to was the education and the faculty. I was 18 at the time, and I think I made a pretty smart decision that what this place, so the place I went to is Ashoka University. That's
So
where
that's in New Delhi.
it's on the outskirts of Delhi.
Okay.
And while I was not clear of any job prospects, I knew that I would get a good education here. That much confidence I had. And I figured, and again, I didn't have any reason for believing this, but I figured that a good education that's enough to stand on my feet.
Yeah.
That's the best I can get, and I think that's good enough. That's a good outcome.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a job, that's fine. Which was hard to convince other people for. But I think when I decided to go there, my parents protested at first, but then they came around, and then they said, "Okay, go there, but study computer science because computer science is where they thought I would be more employable and I would get a job." So they said, study computer science. Now, in a liberal arts college, as you know, I mean, in any college, this is the norm in America, not the norm in India. You can choose what you want to do. So I was doing math and computer science. The first semester was foundation courses, so there was nothing computer science.
Okay.
Second semester, there was an intro to programming course, and I failed. I got an F, like an F, straight F. So I couldn't do computer science any longer without sort of repeating the courses. I was just not eligible.
Yeah.
Another blessing in disguise. It just worked out very well. So I changed my major to math, and then I eventually majored in math.
So I guess to somebody watching the video, we can say, just because you have F in a grade or exam or class doesn't mean it's the end of the world, right? So just and another thing that I really like that you mentioned is obviously you talked about you not being sure of what you wanted to do or what you saw yourself as, and that's okay, right? It's okay to not know what you will do in 5 to 10 years. It's something that takes time for you to learn, understand, and you can observe from the community, the society that you're around with. Like you talked about everybody wanting to be in computer engineering field, and it wasn't something that you really enjoyed or liked.
Yeah, enjoyed, liked, and I failed for different reasons. It wasn't entirely my fault, but again, blessing in disguise. It just worked out for me.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about, like, you guys obviously you mentioned you worked in a consulting firm after graduation. So you majored in math.
Yeah.
Right. So how did you get into consulting after getting a bachelor's in math?
Yeah. So once as I was about to graduate and I was in my final year in college or senior year, I didn't know what I wanted to do again. I didn't know. I did not know what I wanted to do in terms of a good job. I didn't know what a good job looked like. I was clueless. Like I didn't know. At the time, though, I figured a couple of things had happened. One is that I heard about consulting from someone. I had no idea what consulting was. One of my friends had interviewed for a consulting firm the year before,
Yeah.
the same firms. So I got this vague sense that you don't really have to, you're not expected to be a specialist. Consulting means you will work in different sectors and different industries and you'll get exposure. And it's meant for people that don't know what they want. So I said, great, I mean, that works out. And the other thing was, and this is where sort of serendipity played a part, I think the biggest or three of the biggest consulting firms in the world are McKinsey and Company, Bain and BCG, and there's also a few others like A.T. Kearney, now called Kearney, Deloitte, etc. Through a great outside of my control series of events, McKinsey and BCG and A.T. Kearney came to my university campus for recruitment. Now, this was in the background because the founders at Ashoka put in a lot of, they invested a lot in making sure students got great opportunities. And this is it. Getting into a place like McKinsey is single-handedly the best job you can get after college in India. It's not the same in the US. In the US, there's many more choices. You can be a software engineer, go to Uber, Google, maybe McKinsey, and McKinsey is still very well reputed here. But there's 10 other options like McKinsey. In India, there's only one McKinsey, and there's no other option like it. So the other thing that happened was I realized that, look, I've gone to a liberal arts college, had a great education, but there is no brand or reputation that I am benefiting from. If anything, and again, at that time I didn't know much, if anything, I have a disadvantage being from a liberal arts college. I know I got good education, but the world doesn't see it that way. If I get into a place like McKinsey and they had come to interview students, all of that will get nullified. Like it will compensate for anything on my resume that I may have lacked. It'll be a fresh start. Like I'll be at the same footing as everyone else. So the combination of these two things, which is didn't know what to do. It was a job for people who were young, smart, looking for a good gig to learn, and the fact that it carried prestige.
See, you mentioned something that you're trying to or looking forward to learn. Right, that's another thing. As you get into workforce, doesn't matter what it is. If you're looking forward to learn, there is definitely something for everyone, you know.
Absolutely, and so that's how I decided. Okay, consulting firms look good. They were so in India again, different from the United States. The norm is that for many colleges, companies come to campus to hire you. It's a metaphor. What it really means is that the college facilitates the process of you getting a job. Unlike here, where you are supposed to do it yourself. So they came on campus, and they were the first companies to interview. So I was eligible for McKinsey and A.T. Kearney, and I got an offer from both.
Okay.
So that's where that's how I got into consulting.
Okay. And then that led you to coming here, right? Obviously, you mentioned that you've been to different places. Well, tell me about some of the experiences that you have had in terms of traveling in different places, different countries around the world, working.
Yeah. So a lot of the travels I had were not for work.
Okay.
So I'll give you a timeline and then I'll talk about my travels. So I stayed with McKinsey for about a year, so 2019, and then COVID happened. I joined in August 2019, March COVID happened, and I left in October of 2020. So I was there for just over a year. And then I joined the current place where I'm at, and because of that, I came to the United States. But I traveled a lot for myself. I think since when I was young, I always wanted to travel a lot. And I traveled a bit, but not as much as I wanted to. Not in the way I wanted to. So I was lucky I was able to travel to a few places, and I think some places I told you, like I went to, this is before I came here, right? So I went to Spain for a graduation trip. I had saved up money for a year, and this is crazy, but I spent 3 weeks in Spain, and my total cost of the trip, including all flights, all hotels, all meals, including every single thing, for 21 days was about $1,300.
Okay, that's not bad. That's not bad, honestly.
It was pretty tight, I can tell you. If you divide that by so firstly you take out the flight. The flight itself is what, $500?
Something around that.
Then you take out the basic. So I'm a citizen of India. I had to apply for a visa.
Okay.
So the visa process takes away another $100. How much am I left with? 800 or so. between all other logistics and stuff. I remember, so that I actually remember the money in rupees. I don't remember the dollar. It was 1,20,000. I'm guessing it's about 1,500 now, or maybe just a little less, 1,300 or so. But it was pretty tight. Like I was dragging my suitcase.
So that was your first international trip.
It was not the first. I had been to a few places before, so the travel bug was always with me. So I first traveled abroad when I was in eighth grade to Singapore with my family. That was great. That's when I knew I really liked to travel.
Yeah.
So I was always looking for opportunities to travel, even though they weren't that many. So when I was in college, because I was in Model UN in school, I found a conference in China. So it turns out that Harvard University organizes a Harvard MUN in China. So when I was a sophomore, second year student, I went to China for a week by myself. So the conference organizers paid for my stay and meals for the duration. I put up the money for my own ticket, and I spent a week in Beijing, and that was great. And so Singapore, Beijing, I had traveled to Singapore again for a student competition when I was in high school. Then I had been to Russia, so I'd been to a pretty strange assortment of places. So one of my dad's friends was India's ambassador to Kazakhstan, which is a country bordering Russia. So we wanted to go to Kazakhstan, which is not really somewhere you go to travel to. So I told my dad, if we're going that far, might as well go to Russia. I mean, that's the real tourist destination. So I went to Russia, and that was great. I really liked it.
And, so what would you say to viewers who don't travel or don't like traveling? What's something that they need to look into or look after in terms of different places? Because obviously, when you travel, the way you see or the way that people talk about places and the way you see is always different.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot that can be said on travel, right? I mean, and a lot of people have said a lot of things. The good, the bad, the ugly, people are different, and there's a lot to be said. I think I personally like to discover and learn new things. For me, it's a part of that discovery process, and that's what really excites me to go to new places. One thing I can say though, one thing I can definitely say, having done this enough and now having been to a pretty diverse set of places, people are fundamentally the same. And this is not an obvious thing. It's not an obvious thing. It looks, I mean, fundamentally we're Homo sapiens. Our genetics and our DNA is by and large pretty similar. And because for those who don't travel much, I mean, that's fair, it's your choice, but we always view other people as other. And what we talk about is how we're different. When you travel to a place like China, where when I had gone, this was back in 2015, 16, nobody spoke. I couldn't find somebody speaking English. You realize, and what you start to notice is not how we're different. That's pretty obvious to you. You start to notice how we're fundamentally similar. That despite the cultural differences, despite nothing in common in terms of language, I look different in China. Like people would come click a picture with me. They'd never seen someone like me. Brown skin, different accent, not American, right? So they were at least used to Americans, but not somebody from India. And you realize that the differences are fine. I mean, we know that, but fundamentally we're similar. They want to work hard. They want to make a living. They love their own family. They get happy.
They love their culture.
They love their culture, not that different from mine. And on the culture side, I think an even more eye-opening experience for me was when I went to Pakistan. So I think I didn't mention that to you, but maybe some people know, maybe some people don't, but India and Pakistan are neighboring countries in South Asia, and they used to be one country until there was a partition, and the two countries have had they've had their differences. Like it's a rivalry of sorts. The people are similar, but yet on the political stage there's a rivalry. So I mean, if I had to give an example, it would be like, and I don't have a good example, but they're rival countries in many ways. Sporting, India, Pakistan sports games, like cricket games, are hugely watched. The two armies have been to war 3-4 times. So it's like America and the Soviet Union. That's what I would say.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
best example I can give.
yeah.
And I went to Pakistan when I was in the 10th grade, so I was pretty in school. I
Yeah.
went for a Model UN conference, and growing up, I had always seen that you see the news. It's like Pakistan did this to India, Pakistan attacked India, Pakistan did this, did that, whatever. Cool, okay. So I went to Pakistan, and I saw the exact same news, except instead of Pakistan, it was India.
The other way.
Exact same news. There was no difference.
Yeah.
So when India said Pakistan did a ceasefire violation, they crossed the boundary, they shot at us. Exact same thing. India shot at us. This is what India did. And when I was there, I realized, how do I know which side is true?
Yeah.
I mean, sure, my people, my country, great, but that's what these people also think. How does that mean that I am on the right, or my country is right, or my people? There's no way to say that. There is no basis to say that. And that's when I realized that determining the truth from what you hear is very.
It's a hard task.
It's a hard task, and that was the first experience of that. That was the first enlightening moment. And then the other thing happened, which is that people were extraordinarily welcoming. In fact,
but you don't hear that in the news.
You don't hear that, right? So because I was from India and I was a kid, I actually got special treatment in Pakistan. So I would go to a shop and they would give me a discount. Wow. They would tell me about their family that's still in India. They went out of their way to take care of us because they knew that we were their guests.
Yeah.
So the experience could not have been more different. I mean, and that was. And it's funny because the place looked similar to India. It felt similar to India. The people spoke the same similar language. So there wasn't, and that's where I first saw that it's not about what's different. It's about what's similar. And then of course that sort of continued in my other travels.
Wow. Well, that could open someone's point of view, how they see their self or the way they view their country, where how certain people support certain teams doesn't mean the other team sucks. I wanted to ask you, so just going on in terms of visiting different countries and whatnot, when you came here to the US for the first time, what was shocking to you in terms of you're like, oh my gosh, like what was your first shocking moment when you came to the US?
Shocking.
Yeah.
I actually
It's something that you like, surprised.
I'm trying to play it back. So I first arrived into New York, and then I think for me, so coming from India, and this is what I love about being here also, is just how quiet it was. So
without the horns and
just peaceful. And I went to New Haven, Connecticut the first time. So what had happened was this was 2021, and so COVID is still happening. It's still happening. It's still happening. India, there were two vaccines that had come out. I think one was an Oxford University vaccine. There was another vaccine. India came up with its own vaccine.
Yeah.
For some reason, I got that vaccine, and that vaccine was not recognized by America. So at the time, you had to be vaccinated by a recognized vaccine before you could travel abroad. I mean, that's how the situation was in COVID. I was completely sold by Hollywood or New York City. Now, why was that the case? I don't know. I just had this fascination in my head that I want to go to New York. Now, because of COVID, I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So I decided, I'm going to go as soon as I can. Long story short, in October of 2021, I think America recognized the Indian vaccine. And the very next day, I booked my tickets to New York for the end of December, for like 20 days, 15 days or so. So I was going to visit New York City in the winter, unfortunately, but a friend of mine, she goes to Yale University, which is in New Haven, Connecticut. So I thought I'm going to spend some time with her.
Yeah.
And then I had a friend in Boston. And then back to New York, do a bit of DC and just touristy stuff on the East Coast. And that's what I did. So so I took that flight in, got into New York, they pulled me aside, which is, I answered the questions, then I got out of JFK, took the train and went to New Haven. And I think the first thing, I don't remember much from that trip in the sense that it was nothing extraordinarily stood out. Maybe that's the answer to the question. I think the first time I got here, nothing was extraordinary.
Okay.
Now, That could be because I had in India, at least in urban India, there's a lot of American music, American movies, American shows.
And also, you've been traveling.
I had
so-
been traveling,
yeah.
so there was nothing that really got me in that sense. I really liked the quiet. I really liked. Like I had been to Spain, so it was not that different in terms of like what I was physically seeing. But I think now, as I'm thinking about it, I think maybe the thing that stood out to me the most was that nothing stood out. And I thought I'm going to go to New York City, like this mega city, this city of the world, capital of the world, and New York and NYC, and I was underwhelmed. And I thought New York was overrated, which is different now that I've been here for 2 years. I actually really like New York now.
Okay.
So that's a different journey. But yeah, at first I think I was just a little. It was good. It was good, but nothing extraordinary to talk about. Honestly, really, that was the very first trip.
Okay. Wow. So obviously, people travel. Make sure you book a flight to somewhere that you have never been. Maybe you'll learn something. Maybe you'll see something. I always suggest people. When you travel, you learn, you see, you understand things better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to India. Okay.
Yeah.
For a second, I'm gonna ask you. Give me a few things. Give me a food. Give me a place, and give me a music or something that you really miss. You can only answer one. One food that you really miss.
One food that I really miss. It's got to be home food. Anything that's made at home, because I don't cook much here.
Okay.
So I'm eating out a whole lot.
Okay.
I will say it's very specific, but rajma and rice.
Okay.
Rajma is kidney beans.
Okay.
So that's what I really miss.
Okay.
I still don't know how to make it. It's not that hard, but yeah, that's.
And a place, any place that you really miss?
Yeah, I would say it's Bangalore.
Bangalore.
So that's the
What do
city.
you like? What do you like about Bangalore?
I think my life in Bangalore was great.
Okay.
So Bangalore, just for everyone's context, is the Silicon Valley of India. It's a city in southern India. The weather there is just like California. It doesn't fluctuate a lot. Great weather throughout the year. A lot of tech companies, a lot of young people. And that was really, so before I came to the US, I was in Bangalore for 2 years. After my consulting gig and the current job that I'm at, I was in Bangalore for 2 years and I loved it.
Okay.
That's what I would really miss.
Okay. Any person, any people that you really want to say shout out to, give a shout out to whoever?
Friends and family.
Friends and families. Okay. All right. Lastly, I would want you to give any tips to our youth in terms of career and life advices. Anything that you have.
That's heavy.
Anything meaningful.
I mean, the way I would. It can go in many directions. So, I mean, do you have a more specific kind of thing, or just in general?
In general, like in terms of how we talked about you not knowing what you're going to get into. Like I mentioned, there are many people that are in similar position as you. So any tips for them? Anything that
I see
could be helpful?
Yeah, I think one of the more important things which I ended up doing, I just didn't know I was doing it, is self-discovery. I think it's very important to do that. Who you are or were in high school and college is very different from who you can be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, with a family and children, and maybe it can change radically. In that sense, I think life is amazing. It's miraculous. It's wonderful. It's magical. Anything can happen. The thing is, you don't know what's going to happen.
That's true.
The best part is you don't need to know what's going to happen. You just got to roll with it. So I think, I mean, if I can, there's a lot one can say, I mean, depending on what you're looking for, but I would say just being aware of the process of self-discovery, that you will figure out what you like, you will figure out what kinds of people you like, you will figure out what kinds of jobs you like, what kinds of jobs you don't like. I think there's a lot of merit in figuring out what you don't like, a lot of merit in figuring out what you're not okay with, and then of course you also figure out what you do like and what your preferences are. I think that is a very, very powerful process. It's not a trivial process. It's not something that's happening in the background. I think it's very much in the forefront, because from a career and from a work perspective, once you figure out what it is, and that can change. So it's not like
Yeah.
this thing that you figured out is static, like this book.
Yeah.
It's actually evolving. It's like it's changing.
Mhm.
But once you get a feel for what that is, then it's much easier to actually figure it out and be happy doing what you're doing. But figuring out is the hard part.
Sure.
And I think giving yourself the time and space to figure that out, I think it's very important. There's no rush. I mean, what's the rush for? We're all going to die anyway. so for the time you're here, might as well, have fun, do it the way you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you giving your personal point of view and advices to our audiences, our viewers. Again, guys, thank you for watching, sharing, and subscribing our videos. I would definitely, I'd love to continue and talk more about it, but thank you for your time, Sahil.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. Okay. Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Thanks.